All right, good morning, everybody. This is, yesterday I heard on the radio Dennis Prager reading this column that he wrote. I don't know if he wrote it after I called him the other day and was on the show. I don't know, because, I brought up one subject, I think it was last Thursday. But I wanted to critique some points. He has some good points, but one point that's extremely wrong, and another point that also should be 2 or 3 points that deserve some criticism. And I do this respectfully, even though I more often than not disagree with Mr. Prager when he talks about pretty much anything Jewish, because I don't know where his ideology really comes from, because he's admittedly not Orthodox anymore, though he was raised as such. So, excuse me for the sneezes. I'm not going to edit those out. Let's keep going. Imagine a group of people who want to destroy Italy because they claim Italy's origins are illegitimate. Imagine further that those people maintain that of all the countries of the world, only Italy doesn't deserve to exist. Then imagine that these people vigorously deny that they are anti-Italian. Would you believe them? Now substitute Israel for Italy, and you'll understand the dishonesty and the absurdity of the argument that one can be anti-Zionist, that is against the existence of a Jewish state, but not be anti-Jew. The big difference, again, which he's going to try to answer, but I don't think he satisfactorily answers, is that Italian is a nationality and Judaism is a religion. He claims that Judaism is more than a religion. I'm going to try to make the argument that it really is not much more than a religion in that sense, which, again, I know a lot of people disagree. It was something that I brought up when talking to him on the radio the other day. So I just want to discuss this. Yes, so you could, one might be anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist, but being anti-Zionist does not necessarily mean one is not anti-Jew. But also being anti-Zionist doesn't mean that one is necessarily not anti-Jew. In the line of work I work in, I work as a prison chaplain, and we have a lot of mentally ill inmates. And sometimes I'll hear at work, they say, well, his problem is not a mental illness problem, but rather a behavioral problem. Well, it can be both, and the same thing. One can be both anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. I would say most Gentile and even secular, quote-unquote Jewish or Jewish identifying anti-Zionists who are secular, and actually just secularists and not Jewish. But I posit, as I said to Dennis Prager the other day, non-Gentile. We use the term non-Jewish, right, to refer to Gentiles. I think it's more, and this was my argument and my thesis, is that there's more room to say Jews are non-Gentiles in a certain sense. But let's go through that, and mainly because there's nothing wrong being a Gentile in Judaism, absolutely nothing wrong. Righteous Gentiles have a place in the world to come, but there's something very wrong being non-Gentile and not living up to what Judaism expects. But let's move on from there. So let's just continue reading this, and then we'll discuss a little bit more. Yet, that's precisely what anti-Zionists say. They say that Israel's existence is illegitimate. They don't say this about any other country in the world, no matter how bloody its origins, and they get offended when they're accused of being anti-Jew. How can they make this argument? First, they change the topic. They say that it's unfair to charge those who merely criticize Israel with being anti-Semitic. No one says criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, but anti-Zionism isn't criticism of Israel. Anti-Zionism is the opposition of Israel to Israel's existence. And I would say, again, there's so many different types of Zionists, and there are different types of anti-Zionists. I think one thing Mr. Prager is doing here is he's painting anti-Zionism with a broad brush. The truth of the matter is that there are different types of anti-Zionists. I would say, there are those who oppose its existence as a Jewish state, but not as a state of its people. There are different ideas. There's also post-Zionism, non-Zionism, all different types of approaches. So Mr. Prager says Zionism is the name of the movement for the return of Jews to their historic homeland. That's not actually what Zionism has always been. There are parts of Zionism that are only that, particularly religious Zionism, for the most part, is only attached to the Holy Land. But there are other forms of Zionism that originally they would have accepted Uganda or somewhere else, or even an island in upstate New York or something else as being the Zionist state. Over the past 3,000 years, there were only two independent states located in what is called Israel. Both were Jewish states, and invaders destroyed both. No Arab or Muslim or any other sovereign country ever existed in that land, which was given the name Palestine by the Romans, says, to remove all memory of the Jewish state they destroyed in the year 70. It's a little bit later than that they put the name there, but that is true. There has never been an independent country in the Holy Land since, I guess, the Canaanites, which there were several different ones. But I think part of what we really have to discuss here is the difference between 1890s nationalism and biblical national identity, which are very different types of things. And I think that is, to make a comparison between the two commonwealths that existed in biblical times, the first and second, first Israelite commonwealth split into two kingdoms, the Israelite kingdom and the Jewish kingdom, and then the subsequent second Jewish commonwealth that existed in the Holy Land. There is a difference between what that is and what the modern day state of Israel is. And I think the major difference is both of them were founded by prophets. And that is why, from the religious standpoint, we have to wait for a prophetic mandate. The Bible promises, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord." And until then, there cannot be a true restoration of Israel. I kind of make a comparison, actually, what we read a few weeks ago in Genesis, that an angel gave the name Israel to Jacob, and then later God gave that name. And actually that angel is Satan, according to some commentaries. So in a certain sense, this restoration, so forth, is a satanic one. That is, certainly what the Satmar Rebbe's Chosy Galenu taught of this current state of Israel, and we're waiting for a godly restoration. So anyway, second, anti-Zionists claim that they can't be anti-Jew because Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. That is the same as saying Italy has nothing to do with Italian. No, that's not true. You could make the comparison that the Vatican has nothing to do with Catholicism, perhaps. That would perhaps be a fair comparison. But to say that Italy has nothing to do with Italian is nothing like saying Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It's rather, to say Italy has nothing to do with Italians, it's like saying Zionism has nothing to do with the state of Israel, the Zionist state of Israel. Judaism is always composed of three components: God, Torah, and Israel, the people Israel, and the land of Israel. Israel is as much a part, this is a difficult turn here, of Judaism as our God in the Bible. Well, the thing is first of all, the founders of the state of Israel turned their backs on God, and they only used the Bible as a weapon for their ideology, and not anything that's actually rooted in anything truly biblical. So that's one part of it. But the other thing is that it's the people and the land. The land is not the state. The state is something different than the land. 100% authentic Judaism has a big connection to the Holy Land. But the truth of the matter is, other religions also have devotions to our Holy Land. But the main idea of our Holy Land is a religious one and not a political one. the Mishnah says that what is the holiness of the Holy Land is that from there certain agricultural sacrifices and offerings were grown only there, and the various things, the Omer and the Shtei Alechem, a barley harvest sacrifice and a wheat harvest sacrifice, that those could, and the Bikurim, the first fruits, could only come from the Holy Land and not from anywhere else in the world, and that is the holiness of the Holy Land. And then the Mishnah, again, this is the basic part of the Talmud, goes on to describe the holiness of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and the Temple, and that the definition of their holiness is in no way a political definition, but rather a religious one of restrictions and so forth that apply to the land that don't apply to other places in the world, and even other parts of the Holy Land or other parts of Jerusalem. So yes, indeed, there is a major connection to the Holy Land, but that's a religious devotion and not a political one, just like the truth of the matter is Catholics don't really have a political connection to Vatican City, but rather a religious devotion to the Holy See. So then the next point is really, to me, the most contentious one. Moreover, the pro-Israel, i.e. the most Zionist Jews, or the Orthodox, who are the most religious Jews, that there exists one tiny group of ultra-Orthodox Jews in Torah Karta that is anti-Zionist means nothing. They're as representative of Judaism as the Ku Klux Klan is to Christianity. First of all, as far as I know, there's nothing Christian, ideologically Christian, in the Ku Klux Klan that I know of. I'm not familiar so much with their ideology. I think their ideology is mostly based really in the ideology of the Democrat Party. The Ku Klux Klan always was the terrorist wing of the Democrat Party, which has kind of now changed to Planned Parenthood, kind of and they switched their lynching from lynching adults to lynching babies in the womb. And they've killed many more African Americans that way, and that's really where the entire quote-unquote flip happened. The Republicans never became the racists, as they claim that somehow Nixon's Southern strategy meant that all of a sudden the Republicans became the racists, the party of Lincoln. No, it's just the opposite. The South is not racist anymore. There's much more racism in urban areas, particularly in the North. I'm much more afraid as a very visible Jew walking around in Manhattan than I am walking around in some rural place in Arkansas. But in any event, the tiny group of ultra-Orthodox in the Torah Karta are only representative of their extremism in their solidarity with the Palestinian movement, which I strongly disagree with, as well as other parts of their ideology. And not only that, but most anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox Jews disagree with. But the other parts of their ideology, that they have disrespect for other people they disagree with, even other anti-Zionist rabbis. In the Torah Karta protest in Kiryas Joel every year on Tisha B'Av, because of the Kiryas Joel Free Public School District. In any event, their anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodoxy is not tiny. It's actually quite large, and there's also many non-Zionist, perhaps more non-Zionist ultra-Orthodox than there are anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox. And then here and there, you'll actually come across some, although it's rare, modern Orthodox who are anti-Zionist or non-Zionist. For example, Professor Yaakov Rabkin, who wrote a book about anti-Zionism. And I went to yeshiva with his son, who is a Zionist. But in any event, religious Zionist. But the point that we want to bring up here is that the Satmar community is a the largest Hasidic community that exists. And they are avowedly anti-Zionist, but they're not necessarily anti-Israel. And they're certainly not pro-Palestinian. So I think a distinction has to be made between that type of anti-Zionism, the anti-Zionism of Satmar and Brisk, and the anti-Zionism of Neturei Karta, which is similar but different, and then the anti-Zionism of, let's say, secular groups like the Jewish Voice for Peace and others, which I think can actually be labeled as anti-Semitic or self-hating in a certain sense. And then the anti-Zionism of non-Jewish groups, of various Arab groups and so forth, which for the most part are actually just a mask for anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and so forth. And that's where the distinction really needs to be made. But I do believe that and again, not everyone who uses the term Neturei Karta are quite the same as the others. Particularly in Jerusalem, there are a lot who call themselves Neturei Karta. There's also in England groups like this that are anti-Zionist, very strongly anti-Zionist, but in no way anti-Jewish and in no way pro-Palestinian. But for the most part, that's really the major issue. So yes, there are those small groups that are radical in that way. But the much larger, and I would say mainstream, ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists are much different. One thing is that the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists in the Satmar community, of which there's probably at least 150, if not 200,000 individuals who are in that camp in America. When we're talking that there's, maybe 14 million quote-unquote Jews in the world, which again, I question that number. But as far as like real Jews, maybe 1 or 2 million that are Orthodox, right? And if we're talking about 10 to 20% of the Orthodox world is anti-Zionism, that's not tiny. But a distinction definitely has to be made between the Neturei Karta and Satmar, Brisk, and all the other groups. And then also, again, the non-Zionist groups, who are very, perhaps, again, you might identify them as pro-Israel, but not supportive of the idea of Israel as a Jewish state, or not connected to that in a religious way, the way that the religious Zionists are. So it's really much more complicated than he's presenting here. However, the better answer is that, and to compare even the Neturei Karta to the Ku Klux Klan is ridiculous. You might want to maybe compare them to the Westboro Baptist Church, but even that is not really so, because the ideology of the Neturei Karta is an ideology of love. I think it's misguided in the way that they do it by trying to work together. I have no problem with interfaith dialogue between Jews and Muslims, or Jews and Christians, or anybody else. And I also have no problem with explaining this view to the world, which some people feel that, we should be hush-hush and not, in order, for the sake of solidarity, we should not vocalize the fact that this view exists. I think it's healthy for the world to know that the Jewish communities have different views, just like Jacob divided his children into different camps. I do believe there is value in a diversity of ideological camps, and certainly in the pluralistic world that accepts reform and conservative and all these other aberrations that go away from Judaism, although some parts of the conservative movement are halachic and Jewish. The Reform movement, and perhaps not heretical. The Reform movement is a heresy, even though it's one of the larger movements. But I don't know how many of those are actually very religiously inclined. This idea of what Dennis Prager said, that the Orthodox are the most religious, is somewhat wrong, because there's different ways of being religious. You know, you could, first of all, what is religion? How does one define religion? So to say that the Orthodox are the most religious, it's not necessarily true. They're the most authentically Jewish and religious. But Reform can be very religious. It's just Reform is a different religion. Reform, what calls self-Reform Judaism, it's a different religion, just like the Christian forms of Messianic Judaism are a different religion because of the heresies. And I do make a distinction there as well, which we can talk about at a different time. As opposed to the conservative movement, which is somewhat more of a halachic movement and not necessarily heretical. They do try to find sources, whatever they say and so forth, and however they have veered into territory that is a little bit different. So even the comparison to the Westboro Baptist Church is not really fair to the Neturei Karta, because like Satmar, they are very charitable people, people who love their fellow Jews, who will do anything to help a fellow Jew, even one who's not so religious, or not so observant or whatever else. They have a heart. They're very charitable. The Satmar are probably the most charitable people in the world that I know. Very, very generous people. So this is wrong. This is really the point that he gets wrong. One is that the Neturei Karta are tiny. The Neturei Karta are, but the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists are not tiny, and then add on that pretty much all the rest of the ultra-Orthodox who are not anti-Zionist are non-Zionist, including Chabad. As much as Chabad tries to pretend to be Zionist for PR, Chabad always has been and always will be at least a non-Zionist movement, if not an actual anti-Zionist movement. But again, how do you define Zionism? The one part is that actually is that in a certain sense, from the secular standpoint, the secular quote-unquote Jewish, which is really anti-Jewish, anti-Zionism, in their viewpoint, the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists, perhaps even including the Neturei Karta, are actually Zionist, right? In a way, maybe we're the true Zionists, because the Talmud tells us the existence of the state of Israel prevents the coming of the Messiah. So the question is, and I know people interpret that differently, but that's the very plain reading of it is that Ein ben David ba acheticha malchus azulus mi Yisrael doesn't mean another malchus over Yisrael. It doesn't make any sense that would be the context, but rather the malchus Yisrael has to be, there cannot exist. Malchus has to be taken away. The government, the kingdom has to be taken away from the Klal Yisrael before Mashiach can come. And so, in a certain sense, opposing Zionism is really the most pro-Zionist thing you can do if you interpret that in the sense of the return to the Holy Land. Although there are those, I think, particularly among the Neturei Karta, who might posit that that the Talmud actually teaches and the Medrash teaches that the whole world will become the Holy Land. And the whole world will be holy and elevated, and as the Bible says, the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth as the waters cover the sea, and so the whole world will be elevated when Mashiach comes. Let's keep going. Third, anti-Zionists claim that Judaism is only a religion, therefore Jews are only members of a religion, not a nation. But Jews are called a nation more than 100 times in the Bible. That is why there can be irreligious, secular, and even atheist Jews, because Jews are not only religion, but a people, a nation. No one thinks that non-religious Jews are not Jews. There can be no atheist Christian, because Christianity is a religion and not a nation. I want to disagree with this. This was the point that I really brought up. Who is a Jew is a Jewish question. Meaning Judaism defines who is a Jew. But I posited that really there are three categories. There are Jews and Gentiles, obviously. Again, in Judaism, there's nothing wrong with being a Gentile. The righteous Gentiles have a place in the world to come. And if one is born a Gentile, doesn't choose to become Jewish, then he remains a Gentile and he bears no punishment for not converting to Judaism. He might receive a great reward and a greater reward for converting to Judaism if he lives in a proper Jewish lifestyle. But he's not punished for not converting. Although it does say that converts suffer for waiting too long to convert. But this term nation in the Bible mean the same, or in Jewish liturgy and other Jewish texts, mean the same thing as 1890s nationalism. It does not. The best we can compare it to, if you want to use comparative religion and comparative languages within Semitic languages, is the Muslims call themselves the Ummah, which translates as nation or people. It's a cognate of the Hebrew word Am, which is used constantly to refer to the Jewish people. The word Goy, which usually is translated as Gentile, actually means nation, and the Jewish people are called Goy Kadosh, the holy nation. The Israelites are called the holy nation. And actually the word Gentile actually means nations. But in any event, that is what we are discussing here, is that the term, let's say again, among Muslims, if someone becomes kufar, which is the same as the Hebrew word kofar, then he is not part of the Ummah, right? He's not part of the Am. He's not part of the nation, if you want to use that term. Just because an English word meant one thing in 1620 or 1612, whatever, when King James was translated, doesn't mean that it meant the same thing in 1890 or in 2023. So it's not because Jews are called Am that an irreligious or atheist Jew can exist according to the idea that one can exist. I posit that within Jewish law there are three categories. There's the Jew and the Gentile, but then there's also what usually is called Yisrael Mumar, a Jewish apostate. I think in English a good definition, and based within Jewish law, is a non-Gentile, because in our liturgy, in the Orthodox liturgy, every morning we say, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, the King of the universe, Shelo asani goy, or Shelo asani nochri, or however else, or Shelo asani akum," that he did not make me a Gentile. And our commentaries explain that it's not a dig or an insult against Gentiles, but rather it's a statement that who knows if we really live up to what it means to be a Jew. But at the very least we can say that we are not Gentiles. And so a Jew who doesn't live up to being a Jew is perhaps not a Jew at all. But he's not a Gentile. He's still obligated in all the obligations of a Jew. But he is not, he doesn't enjoy any of the, I would say, rights or privileges of the Jewish identity. And I most strongly hold that he should not self-identify as Jewish if he doesn't believe in the basic precepts. Meaning, if Judaism defines who is a Jew, but one doesn't believe in Judaism, he doesn't believe in God, how can he define himself as a Jew? I, as a religious person, can say, yes, by my religion, he is still obligated in the Jewish law and obligated to repent of his sins and of his heresy and of his apostasy, just like, let's say, within the view of the Catholic Church. I mean, I myself, my mother is Jewish, so I was what we call, quote-unquote, born Jewish. My father is Catholic. And as a baby, I received a bris milah in the Orthodox synagogue, and I was also baptized in the Catholic Church as a baby. And perhaps although I was never confirmed, but perhaps in the eyes of the Catholic Church, I might be viewed as a lapsed Catholic. I never practiced Catholicism, but if I was baptized in that church, perhaps that's the way the Catholics view me, as a someone who is not part, is still obligated, within Catholicism. Islam also, I guess, I understand Islam to say that if someone's father is Muslim, they're required to live as a Muslim, and they could be considered kuffar, they're not identified like as the people of the book or something else if they practice a different religion. So the idea of being a lapsed member of a religion exists in other religions. So this idea that one cannot be an atheist Christian is really not the proper comparison here, because, right, the atheist is no longer a Christian, but in the eyes, but let's say he was baptized into a particular church, many of those churches would say that he has, or we'll take it a different way. I'd say in the Catholic Church, take it even further. Someone who took vows of a religious order to be a monk or a nun, or to be a priest, and then broke those vows. It would be seen in the eyes of the church that he is consistently and constantly within violation of his vows. So he is no longer a priest, right? But he is in violation of his duties, of his vows. And in Judaism, we would say, yes, if someone is born to a Jewish mother, it's essentially born with the vows of Judaism. The Shavua that was given at Mount Sinai, the oaths that were given at Mount Sinai, and so one is, quote unquote, stuck with that. He can never become a Gentile, but that doesn't mean he's a Jew no more than a priest who left the church and got married. Is Karen Armstrong still a nun? Just because she's an ex-nun, just because she previously took those vows. That is really more the way Judaism looks at these questions. But to just say that it's because, and that's why there can be, quote unquote, an atheist Jew. He's not an atheist Jew, he's an atheist non-Gentile, meaning a Gentile is under no obligation to convert to Judaism, but a non-Gentile is under obligation to repent of his abandonment of Judaism. And that's what has nothing to do with the term Am or Goy being used for the Jewish people, because, again, like we said, essentially the word Am in biblical Hebrew would be better compared to whatever the word Ummah means in Arabic. And Ummah in Arabic means religious community, and not an 1890s nationalist ideology. So this idea that no one thinks that non-religious Jews are not Jews is not true. They're not Gentiles, but they're not really Jews. They don't count for a minyan. Their wine is not kosher, and certainly they shouldn't be representing the Jews. And also opposing an evil person like George Soros is not anti-Semitic. Now the question is opposing Benjamin Netanyahu anti-Semitic? Benjamin Netanyahu is a traditional Jew, we might call even conservadox. Like he's not personally so observant, as far as I know. He disowned his one daughter, who became ultra-Orthodox and I believe anti-Zionist. She became a Breslover Chosid. She lives in the anti-Zionist enclave of Mea Shearim. Again, not Nitorei Karta, but nonetheless, certainly not Zionist. Part of that is a personal issue that, she was a daughter from a previous marriage. But, he sat Shiva for his father, and he said Kaddish and stuff like that. And I think he might have even said Kaddish for the whole year, for the whole 11 months, when his father passed away. So he's a traditionalist. He's not a kofar, he's not an atheist, he's not an agnostic, he's not an apostate. He is part of the Klal Yisrael, but again, what does that mean? So anyway, at least as much as Jews who daven, Shachris Mincha and Maariv in a conservative shul are, and I think or people who daven in a Chabad shul, who drive to shul. And again, I don't know if he's Shomer Shabbos or not or what, but doesn't wear a yarmulke all the time, the way that Menachem Begin quite often wore a yarmulke. So force people point to anti-Zionist Jews to prove that anti-Zionism isn't anti-Jewish. That would be like pointing to Americans who gave Stalin the secrets to atom bomb to argue that siding with the Soviet Union in the Cold War was not anti-American. It's interesting because who were those people? It was Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who had very obvious Jewish names, but had nothing Jewish in them. Was it anti-Semitic to lock up Julius and Ethel Rosenberg? I don't believe so. I think it was a mitzvah to kill them because they were evil people, and I would have been very happy to pull the lever on the gas chamber that killed Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They deserved much more than they got, but that was the most we as human beings could give, and I'm sure God is still punishing them to this day for the evil they did. And they were unrepentant. A rabbi was sent to talk to them, and they had nothing to say to him, and he had nothing to say to them. And if at least at the very end, before giving their lives up or whatever, they recognized the evil that they did and repented, then they would go right to heaven. But or maybe not right to heaven, they'd still have to suffer and punish, but perhaps the death could atone for the horrible sin that they did. And that would have been sufficient, because it would still be necessary. And again, I would have still pulled the lever then. But everyone in Judaism, anyone who's put to death is, has to, what do they call it? They have to repent first. They have to be offered the chance to confess their sin. And they were offered that, and they denied it. And I think there's nothing wrong with them being killed, as much as all the leftists cry and scream about Ethel and Julius Rosenberg and that it was anti-Semitic. It was not. And I would say the same thing for George Soros. If a proper court of law would find him guilty of the many, many evil sins that he did. Again, no one should do any vigilante violence, God forbid, against George Soros. But if he could be prosecuted and it could be proven how many people he killed with all the things he did in Europe and so forth, and what an evil person he is, and it sounds like his son Alex is maybe worse than him, which is very sad and scary. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. So this is really not a proper comparison. Or to provide another Jewish example would be like pointing a Jew eating pork on Yom Kippur, to argue that eating pork on Yom Kippur is Jewish. Again, if you want to point to Jewish Voice for Peace and other left-wing groups, that's an apt comparison. But you can't compare it to the Neturei Karta or to Satmar or to anyone else who love Jews, who love Judaism, whose whole life is about Judaism, and simply have a different view. And the fact of the matter was, Rabbi Meir Kahane was probably the most extreme Zionist of the 20th century. And he said that the Satmar anti-Zionism is a kosher form of Judaism. He disagreed with the Torah Karta. Well, he disagreed respectfully with the Satmar, but recognized that there are different views that are kosher. But the Torah Karta, he said, have the din of a rodef, and are enemies of the Jewish people because of their alliances with the enemies who are trying to kill Jews. And the thing is, most of these Palestinian groups are anti-Semitic. They want, and you know, there was a video recently. It wasn't even a Palestinian. It was an Australian. Might have been a Palestinian origin, but he had an Australian accent. An Australian imam who said that the Quran doesn't speak about the Zionists, but it speaks about the Yahud, about the Jews. And the fact of the matter, though, is the Quran has many pro-Jewish statements, many pro-Torah statements, even statements that are in support of both the Torah and the Talmud as coming from God, from Allah. And yet, on the other hand, it also has anti-Jewish statements, but some of them are only focusing on heretical groups, but some perhaps against Jews in general. It's hard to interpret exactly, but there's a lot of self-contradiction within the Quran. But what Jews do or believe is not always the same as Judaism. But the thing is that Satmar anti-Zionism is certainly one of the kosher forms of Judaism. No one can say that Satmar is not Judaism. You could say you subscribe to a different form of Judaism, and so too, secular Zionism is also not Judaism. The only form of Zionism that is perhaps Judaism is religious Zionism. And it might be, and again, so there are different views, and I'm willing to say that all of these views are kosher. You can follow Rav Kook, you can follow Rav Soloveitchik, who Rav Soloveitchik might not have really been so much of a Zionist, and even Rav Kook in many ways wasn't really that much of a Zionist. He had many anti-Zionist views and also contradicted himself often. Or you could even follow Meir Kahane, and that's a kosher form of Judaism. So too you could follow the Satmar Rav and the Brisker Rav, who are much bigger Gedolim than certainly than Meir Kahane, who was a Voiler Yid. You know, Rav Victor Miller was a very strong anti-Zionist, but also had tremendous love and respect for Rav Meir Kahane. Rav Miller was greater than Rav Meir Kahane. He recognized him as a good person and a friend, and someone he might have respectfully disagreed with, and that's the way that we are with this. But no one, much more than what Prager is claiming here, that no one says that an atheist Jew is not a Jew. That's not true. The halacha is very clear that such a person is not Jewish, except, as I said on the radio, when it comes to marriage. But again, it's not that there's maybe a requirement to marry a Jew as much as a prohibition against marrying a Gentile. But we can discuss that. It's a different situation. But certainly, the Satmar anti-Zionism is Judaism. It is as much a kosher form of Judaism as Rav Kook or Rav Soloveitchik's religious Zionism is, if not perhaps really more so, because it's the actual traditional stance, and as opposed to religious Zionism actually being an innovation, as opposed to some earlier groups who call Chovevei Tzion, who were not Zionists. They only wanted to go back to the Holy Land as a devotion, but not set up an independent state. And the truth is that Rav Soloveitchik very openly said that the state of Israel is not eschatological, it's not a religious issue, it's more of a political issue, and that whatever connection he has to the state of Israel is patriotic and not a religious issue. That for Rav Soloveitchik, his religiosity and his Zionism were two different things. As opposed to someone like most religious Zionists, including those who are followers and students of Rabbi Soloveitchik, who are religious Zionists, which not all are. Many of my rebbeim were students of Rav Soloveitchik who were non-Zionists. I don't know any anti-Zionist students of Rav Soloveitchik, but I know many non-Zionist students of Rav Soloveitchik, including my Rosh Yeshiva, Zechron Livracha, Rav Abba Braunspiegel, and my Rebbe from high school, Rav Moshe Weinberger, I think would also be in the non-Zionist camp, but still very pro-Israel and very anti-Palestinian. So it's very complicated. The next part is correct. Anti-Zionists claim that Israel is illegitimate because Zionism and therefore Israel is racist. This libel, because half of Israel's Jews are not even white, and also converts exist, although I think there is a certain amount of racism in the difficulty that the Rabbanut places on conversion. Anyone of any race or ethnicity can become a Jew, and then 1 in 5 Israelis is not a Jew, and I think that should be and mostly Arab Muslims who have the same rights as Jewish Israelis, and this is true. Israel is not an apartheid state, as opposed to the potential Palestinian state, or even the somewhat existing one that existed pretty much in Gaza since 2005. I'm saying 2015 rather. No, when did that happen? 2008? Yeah, 2008, right, was when they left Gaza. And that is an apartheid state because Jews are not welcome there. And so it's not. As for Israel's presence in the West Bank and Gaza, 2005. Israel completely abandoned Gaza in 2005. It has nothing to do with race, everything to do with security. Palestinians, other Arabs tried to destroy Israel in 1967, lost the war. And this part is true, if Palestinians would stop killing Israelis, Israel would have no problem with a two-state solution, but Palestinians have rejected the offers, have their own state on 4 separate occasions since 1947. That is the only reason they don't have their own state. And why have they always been rejecting a Palestinian state? Because they will only accept one that eradicates Israel. All of this is true. They've been therefore solely dedicated to destroying the Jewish state and not in having their own state alongside Israel. And 6th and finally, anti-Zionists claim that Israel's origins are illegitimate. Of all the world's 200 plus countries, the only country that anti-Zionists declare illegitimate is the only Jewish one. It's pretty much all you need to know about their motives. I think it's a difference between when a Gentile says this and when a Jew says this, and a religious Jew says this. A religious Jew is saying the illegitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state comes out of a religious viewpoint. And why don't they make the same claim about Pakistan? 1947, 9 months before the establishment of Israel, India was partitioned to Muslim state Pakistan and Hindu state India, just as Palestine was partitioned into a Jewish state, Israel, and Arab one, Palestine. Actually, the Arab one was not Palestine, it was Jordan. Unlike Israel, no Pakistan ever existed, and unlike Israel's, and no Palestine ever existed, and unlike Israel's founding, which created about 700,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands, which Rabbi Victor Miller pointed out, that should be a reason to be anti-Zionist, is that we had our own Nakba that was caused by the founding of the state of Israel, that the Muslim lands, the Arab lands, chased out most of their Jews. And about 700 Arab refugees from what became Israel. The founding of Pakistan created about 7 million Muslim refugees from India and 7 million Hindu refugees from Pakistan, while the highest estimate of Arab deaths that took place when Israel established is 10,000. The number of deaths the creative Pakistan's creation is about 1 million. So why is Israel's legitimacy challenged while Pakistan isn't? The only possible answer is because Israel is Jewish. Not the only possible answer, as we explained, but I do believe it is the answer for the secularists. Of course, not only anti-Zionists hate all Jews, so if you seek to destroy Italy, you don't have to hate every Italian to be anti-Italian. So then he goes on to say not every anti-American hates all Americans, but they still are called anti-American. If you seek to destroy the one Jewish state, you don't have to hate every Jew to be called anti-Jew. The name for that is anti-Semite. I don't really agree with that idea that he's saying, because Judaism is a religion. One could be, Jew of opposing the religion, things like that. And so what makes one anti-American is opposing the ideology of America, of the founding of the Constitution, things like that. So it's and in many ways, a lot of the secular Zionists are actually anti-Jewish. So it's much more complicated than that. But he brings some good points, but some very, very bad ones. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later.